All right, and we are here ready for episode, I believe, 19, if I'm not mistaken, of Masters of the Dungeon, which is our DM Roundtable show. And we are joined today by a very special guest who I'm excited to have, and I've been actually waiting to actually have this gentleman on for a while, so I'm looking forward to that. This is our DM's Roundtable, and if you don't know what that is, it is a show in which myself and my co-host talk about the world of tabletop gaming, role-playing, and things like that. We try to focus on game mastering, but we also talk a lot about game design and about playing and about other things like that. And so it is a great pleasure to have everyone on board. And so I'm going to unmute myself as I usually do so the folks know that we are ready to go. And then I'm going to unmute them. And then I'm going to move over to, if I've done this properly, and I believe I have. Oh, I see that I've done such a good job in capturing all of you that I've utterly forgotten to capture myself the right way. So I'm just off to the side. I'm like, why am I not visible? Like, whatever. Okay, there I am. I love it. Okay, great. I'm actually visible and here. And it is my great pleasure to have my one co-host and one special guest with us. I will start with my co-host and then I'll move on to our special guest. And of course, my co-host is right below on the window, but not in our hearts. And that, of course, is Little Red Dot. Hi, Dot. How are you? How is life in the universe and everything with you?
Zeros, which is great, like back to back for two different campaigns.
Hardest working
So
person in showbiz.
yeah, I guess. So I'll have a lot to talk about tonight. Like I always forget like how important session zeros are and how hyped they make you.
Yes.
Like how excited they get you for like, oh, we're gonna start a new
Yep.
campaign. So like,
Yep.
it's good. I'm pretty stoked, and I just had some food, so I'm feeling real good right now.
Good, good. So we are ready with energy and
I'm
with
super ready now.
excitement
Just
for
needed
session
some
zero.
sustenance.
Awesome, I dig it. I am looking forward to that. And we are also joined by a very special guest who I am excited to have with us because he is the designer of this game, which I have been raving about and of trying to get cast so that I can actually play this. We're closing in, I think, on being able to have it cast, and that is, of course, The Clay That Woke, which I think is one of the more interesting premises of a tabletop game that I have encountered, which is why I was really excited to play it and why I'm excited to have the designer of it on with us today, and that is Paul Zaga. Paul, thank you so much for being with us. How are you? And thank you so much for joining us here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm doing really good. I'm glad to be here.
So I guess what I wanted to ask first was, thank you for the gift sub, Satobo. Wow, that was quick. Thank you so much, Satobo. I appreciate it. Welcome and then Little Red Dot gets it. So see, Dot gets the gift sub from Satobo. That's very nice. Thank you. That's okay. It's all right. You can interrupt me. That's okay. I'm not going to complain about gift subs. I want to start, I guess, by asking a little bit, Paul, about. We're going to get a chance to talk about your current project and a little bit about other games that you've done previously. But I guess I want to ask a more general question about why tabletop game design? Because I remember having read several interviews with you where you said that you kind of moved specifically in the direction of wanting to design games as opposed to doing other things in the sort of more generally creative field, that this was where you really felt your passion. And I wondered if you could expand a little bit about what about game design appeals to you that way in a creative sense or otherwise.
I think one of the great challenges in society right now is so much of human conversation is mediated by corporate platforms like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and the algorithms determine who gets heard and who doesn't get heard, uh, and I think it creates a lot of alienation, and I think it creates a lot of I think it's hard for people. People don't have friends. They feel lonely, and and at a if you dig deep down, role playing games and storytelling games are platforms for human interaction. And if, as a designer, I can help people have better conversations, wholehearted conversations with each other, then, that's just super rewarding to me.
And did you feel a particular draw? I think that's a really interesting answer. Was there a particular draw to you that you think made you well suited for this way of doing it, for being able to make people feel less lonely, I guess, by connecting them together? Was there a draw as to why this worked well for your creative talents?
Um, you know, I think I I grew up without a dad. I grew up without a lot of encouragement. Um, I'd come home from school with a note saying, does Paul want to use third grade maybe? Does Paul want to learn a band instrument, or does Paul want to learn a string instrument? Fourth grade, whatever. Um, and my mom would say, Paul, do you want to do this? And I would shrug because I didn't know. Um, and she'd say, fine. And the note would just go in the garbage. Um, and I ended up spending a ton of time gaming with, I had that sort of typical gamer upbringing of all through junior high and high school, hanging out in the basement, running Dungeons and Dragons. And, so much of running Dungeons and Dragons is game design. You're designing scenarios, you're designing creatures and magic items that are going to have an impact on on how things play out. You're designing quests, and you're designing, and I think, you get to a certain point in your life, where you kind of have to take you have to sort of double down on everything that you've learned to do and say, hey, this is my path.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it could have been anything. It turned out to be gaming, because I spent all my time doing it. And so it became my artistic medium.
It sounds like it's also a sort of a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe I'm stretching too far, a little bit of a love letter to, who you were growing up, maybe? I mean, like, would you have wished for someone to, like you, to design games for you when you were younger, if that makes sense?
Oh, totally. That, I got to the late 90s. I'd had, lots of unsatisfying gaming experiences. And yeah, I'm sure that you have as well, social breakdown, and poorly constructed social dynamics, one-upmanship and PvP um, and and an inability of players to, I don't know, it felt to me like games could be so much more,
Mm-hmm.
and that there was so much potential, and that and so when I got into the early 2000s and I saw people making other kinds of games, I fell into the Forge, which was an online design community.
Mm-hmm.
And and when I designed My Life with Master and I published it in 2003, it's the kind of game I would have loved to have found in a game store in the late 90s. If I'd been browsing the shelves and I'd come across this game, it would have been, it would have been the thing that I would have changed how I thought about what games could be. I designed it for my younger self.
It's interesting. And I actually want to bring up something because this will tie in with Dot as well. Because this past weekend I was visiting, I'm still out here on the West Coast, and so I was visiting in-laws, and we were up visiting other in-laws, so I had just gotten a signed copy, as I was giving Dot a hard time about because she loves this game, for the Queen. And so I had a chance to speak to Alex Roberts and my co-host on Speculate, a podcast that I run, which is an actual play podcast. I actually spoke to her and talked to her about some of this. And so I ended up playing it with these in-laws of ours in this cabin up in this the Pacific Northwest. And the thing that was funny, now these are smart, well-educated people, but as I was sort of explaining the way the game worked, and I had only played it like once before, so I was fairly new to this also, but everybody that I know, not just Dot, was raving about it. And so I kind of got through all the instructions, and one of them was like, so nobody really, no one wins then? Really? And I was like, well, I mean, in a way, the whole group wins, sort of. I mean, we're all
Right.
kind of playing together, and they were like, and it was not, they weren't opposed to it, but it was just so foreign to them. And as I say, these are not, these are not, people who grew up in a cave. I mean, they played some games, but not, they played the monopolies and the clues and the risks and the those kinds of games, but the sort of tabletop stuff not so much. And certainly nothing like this, which is a storytelling game where no one really loses exactly vis-a-vis each other. And so that was really, and they did have a good time when they played it, but they just sort of didn't know what to expect when they were going into it. So it feels like what you're talking about, the sort of PvP kind of gaming experience, Paul, seems to be sort of the standard for a lot of people that are outside our relatively small community. And I want to give Dot a chance to get in and ask some questions, but I wanted to throw that over to Dot a little bit because Dot was the one who basically got me first interested in this game as an idea. It does feel that way, Dot, right? I mean, the idea that this is a game, it's a storytelling game that brings us together, but that's unusual, it still feels. It doesn't feel unusual to us, maybe, but it feels unusual to a
Yeah.
lot of people in sort of the extended family that we go into, and I was wondering what you thought about that, too.
Well, tabletop RPGs, in my opinion, they land in this really weird place. It's like we've had games forever and we've had stories forever. Like as far back as we can go, I think I've said that before. We're sitting around a fire. We have very little language and communication. We are in essence cave people. There were games and there was art and there was story. Those are the things that are in essentially embedded in the culture of just being human. But they always kind of existed outside of one another. It's like, sit down, let me tell you a story. Or come over here, let's roll some dice and play a game. And there was this competitiveness that began to come into gaming because it excites people. There's a literal entire marketing concept called gamification that literally attempts to sell you things based on the idea that you think you want it
Sure.
when you paid for it.
Sure, sure.
It's this whole concept. And so the competition aspect, I think, is what has become embedded in our culture now. But tabletop RPGs can rip that away and go back to the essence of what gaming is about, which is having fun and sharing in something. And then you add the aspect of story to it, and you've just got something that is terribly foreign to people. It's like mixing your ice creams. You're like, oh, I think I like my chocolate and my vanilla together. I like this.
Yep.
Kind of still wish I just had my vanilla because it's safe and
Yep.
it's comfortable. And if somebody wins, then we have something to talk about. But oh my God, what if we actually have something to talk about because we made a story together? So yeah, it is a foreign idea. It's a foreign idea to so many people because there is no way to commodify something that you make together like that. Like I don't get a badge or a trophy for it. My character doesn't level up at the end for the queen. Right. There's no way for me to shout at the rooftops what I've gained from doing it other than the sheer experiment of collaborative storytelling, which is hard for some people, I think, to like grasp.
What's your take on that, Paul? I mean, how do we, let's hit it on the head. I mean, how do we then create more of a model of moving away from that as the only option? Because I'm not necessarily suggesting that the competitive games should be removed completely, but you're right that that's the overwhelming dominant sort of, and even when you look at people who are like, oh, I play different kinds of games. I play Settlers of Catan, which, just side note, I loathe Settlers of Catan with the white hot intensity of 1,000 Suns because I think Settlers of Catan is about everything but a game. It's about everybody. It has nothing to do with the game and everything to do with you can fool your friends into giving you stuff. Like I always come on the other side feeling annoyed and
I've been
stupid
doing the
and
show
bitter.
a long time, and this is the first time I've seen Arv just like, no, not happening.
Not a fan of Settlers of Catan at all. But I'm curious about that. Like, is it just a matter, Paul, of is it just game by game or mechanic by mechanic, or what do you do if we sort of how do we create games that generate more kind of connection and sort of, I don't know, combination effects with each other rather than just being competitive against each other? And before you answer that, thank you for the 37 people that just rated from War Mics. Thank you. I'm glad you were last playing Art. We are also last playing Art. We are joined by Paul Sega, a well-known game designer and really interesting guy. And of course, as always, my co-host Little Red Dot. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're also running my Kickstarter for Icarus and Jelinek, which is a big deal for me. That's the art side of things, but I will let my mods handle that and explain that to you. But Paul, so how do we do that, do you think? Do you imagine it as sort of like a game by game thing? Or am I being too grandiose? I mean, maybe I shouldn't do that. What's your take on how we move things forward in terms of cooperative versus competitive game design?
So I think if you look at the board game space, or if you look at the video game space, we're seeing there are strains of cooperative play. In board games, there's Castle Panic, and in video games, there's, you join a guild and you work together to do your raid.
Mm-hmm.
I think a pretty recent game like Tiny Towns has a solo play mode where there are strains of games that are getting away from competitive play.
Okay.
A game like The Mind, is a card game where you're trying to intuit, have intuitive communication with the other players. I think when I think of designing role-playing games and storytelling games, I think my job as the designer is to create a scaffold that activates people and inspires people. It's super interesting. I remember back in the 2000s, I would see people play My Life with Master at a convention, and they'd come away and they'd be really excited, and all the excitement was, oh man, it was awesome when you did this, or oh, it was great when this thing happened, or it was great. They would talk about the events of their game, and it was and their the way they were thinking about it was, you're great, you're creative, you did this awesome thing, I did this awesome thing, we had a really good time, we had this connection. At that point, it doesn't translate back to the designer. They're not thinking and saying, geez, we've played a zillion terrible games. We've played a zillion games that weren't this fun. And yet this time, we played this different game and it was a lot of fun. It takes it takes you hours later before you make that connection.
Mm-hmm.
That, at the moment you're thinking, man, we were on fire, we were, and so I think, as a designer, I think you need to understand human nature. One of the things I try to do is not specify anything in the rules as instructions that I think an inspired human being is going to make a good decision about without me telling them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think leaving that up to the players, up to the player and game master group, to make their own good decisions and know that they're not going to get it wrong. I don't want to over instruct them. I want to conjure in them an understanding of what they're doing and a sense of ownership and I only want to have rules for when I think they're going to defeat themselves. When they're going to make decisions that are less than what they could be. You know, I think in a lot of cases, I think we're so programmed by media. You know, we can watch a rom-com and we know exactly what's going to happen in it because the beats are the same in every single one.
Right.
And we can predict the endings of mysteries because we've seen so many. And the media narratives are, you know, there are corporations that greenlight these films, and the films, you know, follow formulas, and and so we've had those ingrained in us. And I think, you know, if you're going to be playing a storytelling game and you're going to fall back onto all this stuff, the rules that I put in there are the ones that are going to force you out of that bubble a little bit. Those are my strongest instructions. And then when I'm sure that you're about the things that you're going to make good decisions about, I don't write instructions for that stuff because you're human beings and you're, you know, going to make good decisions.
Yeah.
You know, and I do want to say something about that. The experience of reading through a manual I'd never had the experience of reading through a manual like reading through The Clay That Woke, because I would say that I could imagine some people looking at it and being like, where the hell are the reference sheet? You know, like trying to look, where do I find
the
like
rules?
the particular
Give me
thing?
more rules.
Yeah, because so much of it is sort of interwoven with the story, and it feels to me, and I don't know if this is accurate, but it feels to me like something like this, and I suspect this is the case. I have not played with My Life with Master, but I have several friends who have, and have, you know, talked about it with great admiration. That it's almost about setting a mood, an environment, a kind of it's more than a backdrop, but it's sort of setting a condition under which the game is played more than the sort of mechanical state itself. Because when you start reading through and you're like, okay, it's about a jungle and everyone plays a minotaur and everyone at this jungle is gradually creeping in the city and there's this code of silence and the minotaurs can lose it and go running into the jungle, but that's okay because it's partly blah, 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 blah. Like there's a certain point where it's just so, you just go with it. Like it's so odd and somehow kind of constructed in this narratively kind of wandering path. And I know that was, you know, partially intentional. But I think it's got to be gutsy though to, as a game designer and a developer, sit down and say, I'm going to put together this manual, I'm going to create this entire game system, and I'm going to ask people to kind of just walk through the jungle themselves and, you know, to kind of get an understanding of what the game is about. And so I guess I'm curious, is that accurate in your view? I mean, like, are you kind of creating sort of the conditions that we play in? Not to say that the mechanics don't matter, but that the mechanics are almost not as relevant as the kind of the circumstances with which we play. And then secondly, did it take guts to do that? Because it sure felt like, I mean, sitting down and being like, all right, here we go. As a writer myself, God, like I would think I would have a hard time just being like, here we go, take a chance, you know, and sort of throw it out there. But obviously you were able to do so successfully. So I'm curious about the risk taking in this. And I'm also curious again about whether I'm even half close to accurate about what you're trying to do in a game like this.
Yeah. So here's my thinking on that, and whether it's, you know, a risk or whether it took guts or not. You know, you can be the judge. But the hobby is full of fantasy role-playing games that nobody plays. That, you know, I've got a shelf full of them sitting right here, you know, out of, you know, the periphery of the camera. Mm-hmm. You know, all through the 80s and 90s, there's a zillion of them, and you could get them from the used bin at the, you know, at the game stores in the 90s, or at, you know, you'd go to a convention and there'd be a dealer, and, you know, there's a self-published, you know, somebody printed 3,000 copies. This was their dream, right? And when I sat down to think about the text for The Clay That Woke, what I was thinking was like, you know what? If I structure this text the way every other fantasy role-playing game text is structured, with a character creation chapter and a setting chapter and game mastering advice, and, you know, and if I do that and nobody plays it, then I will be devastated. As a game designer, I'm competing for your attention and your time with my game.
Right.
Every game does that differently. For the Queen does that differently. If you're going to do a big setting game, how do you get that done? And if you go back to the 90s, there's games with bits of microfiction in them. I played games back then. Players don't read that stuff. The players come to the table and they expect the game master to educate them, or they rely on the combat system or on gaming experiences that they've had before. And if you're designing a game that's about a philosopher minotaur and a leader minotaur having a conversation about civic and cultural issues, that's you've got to figure out how to teach your genre. And so I wrote it the way I did because I wanted people to ingest it. I wanted someone to, I wanted a player to sit down and start reading it and to be just pulled through it. Mm-hmm. And to just, I wanted to install it in them. And, and I think it works. I mean, it certainly worked with some of the backers. I mean, I had backers from the Kickstarter. I had one guy tell me that when I released the PDF, which was on, I think, a Sunday, he said, I was going to bake cookies, but I saw the email about the PDF. I downloaded it. I opened it to make sure that it wasn't corrupted and started reading it. And 2.5 hours later, I had read the whole thing from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. And he didn't get to make cookies. And I don't care that he didn't get to make cookies because the game, the way I wrote it, worked the way I wanted it to.
That's funny. I also want to point out in a strange bit of irony, because again, there were 674 backers that pledged 25,518. That was almost the identical time period during which this first Icarus graphic novel that I'm now running the Kickstarter for the reboot of was running on Kickstarter the first time. So clearly there's some kismet, I guess, that connects there. I do want to give you a chance to talk about other of your games, but yeah, it really, really struck me about the way that it was like actually reading through a manual like this. And I don't know, Dot, have you ever had a situation with a manual that just, you read it and you're like, what is this doing? This is really cool. What is this doing? Because I kept finding myself asking that question multiple times, like, what is this doing? And in a very positive way. And I think you're absolutely right, Paul. It absolutely drew me in, although I wasn't, trying to bake cookies. I might have been frustrated otherwise. But
right.
But no, I mean, it absolutely drew me in. So you have something like that, Dot?
I don't know. I was thinking about, I'm really into GM-less games right now. And I find that games that are written without a GM tend to read that way, because they're meant as a manual for everyone.
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of a really good example. Oh, I know one that I read cover to cover. I've mentioned it before. The Seven Wonders.
Hmm.
That game reads like that because it's also a not heavily structured. It's basically seven scenarios,
Hmm.
so it reads that way. Like it sets up these really beautiful scenarios. I think that's what it's called. It's been so long since I've played that one. I have to see if I can find it. Yeah, so that one, I find that one read kind of that way to me. But yeah, I find that more and more game designers are beginning to design not necessarily just without like hard game. It's not even rules as much as it is like things. I call it things. It's the things that get in the way of the core of what you're trying to do with the game, right? Charts and tables and magic items and the things, right? When really all of that can be made up by you in game, right? Or as you were saying, it's a narrative based thing. Like I love the idea that these centaurs, or yeah, they're centaurs, right?
Minotaurs.
Minotaurs. I'm sorry, minotaurs. That these minotaurs, they don't have names, that it's not about this like personality or identity of the individual. Like that in itself is kind of interesting and cool. The Bluebeard's Bride game is very interesting read as well. I found that one. I don't know that I read that one cover to cover, but it was pretty close. Like I sat down, was like, wow, because you're looking at like the psychological aspect of breaking up like a person up, and multiple people play a single person, which is really interesting and through a very traumatic kind of horrific experience, and that shared reality. So yeah, I don't know. Like here I am getting ready to launch a Scum and Villainy campaign, right? And like that is a crunch. It's probably one of the crunchiest systems I've played in a really long time, and I'm loving the shit out of it. So I don't know that if I'm like always the right person, because there is a part of me that really enjoys the in the right system, in the right game, the crunchiness. But then again, I also love like die laughing, right? Like I carry that book with me everywhere. I swear by this game. I swear by it because it is a no prep, no GM. Like everything's exactly here, and you just need some die, and you tell a B-rated horror movie who hasn't wanted to do that in their lifetime. Like I think there's something about the games that at least I know I'm drawn to that don't tell the stories that we're used to hearing. We're used to all those fantasy stories in our tabletop RPG games, right? We're very used to seeing heroes and fighting bad guys and dragons and superheroes, but like the stories I want to tell are things like what happens if appliances gain like sentient life and it's post-apocalyptic, or what happens when we live in the world of Anchorman, but you're not part of Ron Burgundy's team. You're just the goofy kids out of Philadelphia, right? So like, I like telling stories from perspectives that you don't always think about, or you don't always see, or you don't even, it doesn't even register like on your radar. The next game I'm going to run, you play cats. We play these cats that protect the world. It's like, fuck yeah. I want to tell a story from that perspective because it gives me an opportunity to break a mold, to have to be bold both as a player, a gamer, a GM, and bless the people that write them, to be bold enough to say, well, not all stories look the same. Or not all people or things look the same. And what we learn from different perspective, I think, is part of that gaming process too. Like playing nameless group of wandering minotaurs. That's really cool. Like what do you learn and get away from that you're not going to get in your basic D&D fantasy setting? And I say basic because it will always just be a fantasy setting.
Which it leads me to one other question that I want to throw towards Paul and throw at Paul, and then we'll move into talking a little bit about maybe some campaigns and sort of more general stuff. And by the way, chat, we are joined as always. I'm joined by my co-host Little Red Dot, but we're also joined by Paul Sega, who is a game designer, developer, and is a lot of really interesting things to say, in particular about tabletop role playing, which is our focus here. If you like this, you should check out his company's website, which is halfmeme.com. And you will get a chance, by the way, to ask questions directly of Paul in a little bit. I will open that up to chat as I always do when we have a chance to get a little bit further. So one thing that I want to sort of ask about that then is, because it seems a lot of this, I mean, we've talked quite a bit about, why we play these particular games, what games can do, how we can try to imagine games differently. And one of the things about a game like Clay That Woke, or certainly My Life with Master or whatever, is that it's very much conceptual. It's a concept game. It's an idea that gives you a different way to look sort of at the world around you. Do you privilege, I mean, I'm sure you try to do both, but do you privilege in your design sort of protocols, do you privilege concept over the mechanical aspect of a game? You know, if you were given a choice, like if you had an opportunity where I can really sort of push something and kind of say something important, but if I do that, it's going to be really hard to put that in a kind of mechanical context that works for most people. I'm wondering where you sort of, where the tipping point is for you between how much you work on playability and how much you play on sort of a concept that's being presented. And I understand you're trying to do both, but we can't always do all things. So I'm wondering where you land on that side if you have to choose.
I, you know, my expectation, I don't, you know, which is lofty, I suppose, is that, you know, the game that I put out there, I'm super intentional with all the aspects of, you know, with the mechanics, with the phrasing, with the, you know, I mean, there are things in the Clay That Woke where, you know, when one type of Minotaur is doing a refresh, he has to have a conversation about a civic or a cultural issue. When another type of Minotaur is doing the same refresh, he has to have an emotional reaction to a cultural problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Venn overlap between those two things, you know, leaves room for conversation at the table. You know, what's the difference between a civic and cultural issue? You know, a civic issue and a cultural issue, and did my emotional reaction satisfy this particular requirement? I am super intentional about all aspects of mechanics and language that I use, and my expectation is, you know, you got to trust me. If you the people who play the game and they trust the mechanics, they're having the, you know, the designed experience at that point. I think mechanics are mechanics are how, you know, I think people know how to submit to mechanics. You know, they know how to sit down at a table, read the rules to a board game, and play it according to the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, you know, the strength of game design. You know, if you want to have a cultural purpose with games, people understand how to sit down, submit them, trust you, submit to your mechanics, and have the experience that you designed. And so I use mechanics very intentionally that way, and that's my expectation. That, you know, if I think, you know, at the same time, Vincent Baker has this concept of the fruitful void, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the basic idea is that the fruitful void is the part of the game that you don't mechanize. And so in the Clay That Woke, you play the game until it's clear whether the watchers, which are this, you know, they're self-aware trees that overlook the crumbling civilization, and it's said that they're going to bloom again. They're going to frandesce and they're going to bloom again, and they haven't for thousands of years. When they're confident that society below them is going to enter a new age of greatness. And how, as a player group, do you decide that? You know, you're sitting there session after session, and you're going to get to a point where, yeah, this is never going to happen, you know, or we're confident it's going to happen. There's no mechanics for it, but as a group of players, you will have created details from session to session to session. The actions of the player characters, the actions of the NPCs, the failures and the successes that people have had, and the dramatic moments where people drew the line and, you know, and made, you know, a self-sacrifice. How does that add up in your mind and in the minds of everyone that you're playing with? are the watchers going to bloom again or not? And you're going to get there as a group. You're going to get to the point where you kind of all feel it. There's no mechanics for it, and that's the fruitful void. So I think so I am a mechanics guy. I mean, if you look at my life with Master, it is dice formulas and mechanics for when you trigger the end of play, and it's a structure for how to which certain things you can role play that will get you bonus dice. You can role play intimacy and desperation and sincerity, and you get dice that have different values. I'm absolutely a mechanics guy because I think the mechanics are the scaffolding for the experience.
That's interesting. I like that idea of the scaffolding of the experience. And yeah, I agree, Yardanel, as I said, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about your current project then, if we can, Paul, because I know little about it other than what you've been talking about a little bit on Twitter that I've seen. Hey, Rock God, what's up, man? But let's talk a little bit about your current project, because I get the impression you're just as pumped up about that. And obviously for you, it's the new hotness. I know you've been doing it for a while, but it's the awesome thing that's current on your list. So maybe talk a little bit about the premise behind the game that you're currently working on, to the degree you feel comfortable doing so, and what sort of has motivated you to start talking about or working through things in this particular game.
So, right, all right. So the project you're talking about is Traverser.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I've got other side projects that you may have seen tweeted about, but
sorry,
but
Traverser is the one I was thinking the most of.
So one of the things about the Clay That Woke is that the player characters are all male.
Mm-hmm.
They're all male minotaurs, and I told myself I was going to publish the game, and it was going to have its moment. It was going to people were going to play it or they weren't. It was going to influence other designers or it wasn't. And one of the things that I told myself was, somebody's going to look at this game and they're going to say, well, what would a game that was all about women characters be like? And I told myself, that's a game for somebody else to do. That's not, my game. And I'm not even going to think about what that game would be like very much at all.
Mm-hmm.
And months and months went by, and and I was telling myself, I'm not going to think about this. I'm not going to think about what this game would be. I made that deal with myself. And I don't know if you've heard it's a quote from Tolstoy, who said, if you want to get an artist to do something, tell them not to do it. I think it was something like, it's the polar bear thing. Don't think about a polar bear. And then the first thing everybody thinks about is a polar bear as soon as you tell them not to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of like that. I was thinking about it, not thinking about it. And ultimately it just sort of fell together for me. And it's very much I wouldn't say, is it a companion game? It's kind of a companion game to the Clay That Woke.
That's pretty awesome.
It has overlap in a lot of ways. It's about women soldiers. It's a science fiction game, not a fantasy game. It's about women soldiers. They were a special unit who were the corporate war powers did research and developed a way to give them quantum reality powers. They could change things about reality. They could cause, if they needed a gun, they could find one under the couch cushion if they needed it. They could they could get information if they needed it. They could get time with people if they needed it. They could be in the right place at the right time. And, you know, they were fighting this corporate war. Well, the world reality breaks apart. It's like 2032, and human stress shatters reality. And then reality knits itself back together, and it's kind of better in a lot of ways. Communities were pulled together from across the globe, and so you get these villages that are made up of, you know, an American style ranch homes and Malaysian stilt houses and Italian villas, and, you know, everything's sort of jammed together. And, you know, it's been a few years and people figured out how to live together, and they've made different decisions about how to organize their communities. There aren't any prisons. There are no cars. They use bioelectric batteries. They convert old motorcycles to be bioelectric. And then what happens is the women soldiers, there's no war anymore because there are these seams in reality, and nobody can cross these seams, and all the corporate interests are, you know, broken by that. And so they took as much tech out of the soldiers that they could and just mustered them out. But when they pulled that tech out of them, they lost time, you know, year and a half, 2.5, 3 years. So they're coming into a different society. And the way that it's a companion game to The Clay That Woke is that The Clay That Woke is about, you know, the individual and the uncertainty of individual actions having an effect on whether society becomes better or not. And the Watchers are the example of that. Traverser is the opposite. Traverser is what happens to a human being who thinks like we do about prisons, about money, about politics, about, you know, what's right and what's wrong, and, you know, how human relationships work. What happens if you take somebody who thinks like us? They're soldiers. They fought to protect corporate interests. What happens if you take somebody like that who thinks like we do and you put them in a better society, a society that's already better and that thinks differently? What kinds of things change? You know, how do they figure out how to fit in? It's The Clay That Woke is about uncertain actions changing society. Traverser is about the uncertain effects of a better society changing the individual. And it has elements that interact with the sort of correspond in some ways to The Clay That Woke. The Clay That Woke is very much, you know, the jungle is a big element of The Clay That Woke. In Traverser, when the reality knitted itself back together, there's rainforest everywhere, and there's more of a wilderness. In The Clay That Woke, there are the three voices, supernatural entities that live in the jungle and that influence, that take an interest in the lives of the Minotaurs, and they meddle in their lives and they have uses for them. In Traverser, in the years leading up to the breaking of reality, so in the years leading up to it, everybody calls that the before, and after reality knitted itself back together, everybody calls that the since. And in the years leading up to that, you know, I mean, in our lives right now, there are algorithms that control all aspects. You know, they're black boxes to us as individuals. But whether you get a better interest rate on a loan than I do is determined by algorithms that lenders, uh, you know, maintain.
Right.
And it takes into account things like our credit rating, but also our zip code and our, all kinds of things are factored into that. And that's not the only algorithm that has, uh, control over our financial life. There are algorithms at the IRS that determine whether we get audited. There are algorithms, uh, all over the place. There are criminal algorithms that determine whether we're a good candidate for, certain kind of financial scams. And in all aspects of our lives, there are algorithms. Facebook has an algorithm that determines, who to recommend that you might, link to as a friend. LinkedIn has an algorithm like that. Twitter has an algorithm that determines whether your stuff gets seen. Tinder and Bumble have algorithms that determine whether, you might be suggested into a romantic relationship with somebody. In the years leading up to the breaking of reality in Traverser, those algorithms got consolidated down through corporate acquisition and through software mergers. The algorithms got consolidated down to just three: one that controls access to information, one that controls access to people, and one that controls access to money. And those algorithms, when reality breaks, somehow they become incarnated as physical entities. And as traversers with powers to manipulate reality, they feel like you encroach on their, their purview. So they're the installed enemies within the game setting. There's three of them, just like there's three voices in The Clay That Woke. They are formerly supernatural, now instantiated physical entities. There are other similarities between the games, sort of, I don't even know what to call them, but they are, points of similar thematic construction.
And I have a lot of people who are asking about, or like furiously, I can see them already like scribbling notes. Like, what is it? So it's Traverser, and Paul goes full Elon Musk with Traversers. I don't know whether he'd be a fan of going down the extreme corporate route. Maybe that might be the opposite of it. But Traverser is obviously still in progress, and I know you've mentioned that you need to get it sort of finished. And what is because you've also run demos of it. I've seen it at a couple of conventions. Do you have an ETA? Like, are you closing in on, you think you might have it done, or?
Yeah. So, the challenge is it has the same challenge as The Clay That Woke, that I need to write it in a way that it's going to install its genre in you, mm-hmm. So that you can have success with it. And I've written, and it's going to have fiction entwined with the rules text the same way that The Clay That Woke does.
Okay.
And I've written the fiction, but I haven't written the expository text for it yet.
Okay.
So what I need to do is do that so that I have a text that external playtest groups, not being run by me, can play it and tell me whether it works. Mechanically, it's done. The core mechanics are done. I've been working on it for years, really, and everything works. It's just about getting the text written and getting it, external play testing to validate that. Maybe some sensitivity reading, mm-hmm. And then I'll do a Kickstarter for it. And I want to do the Kickstarter for it a little bit differently than The Clay That Woke. With The Clay That Woke, with the Clay That Woke, I really wanted I wanted the PDF version to be released at the same time as the print version, so that everybody who was reading it would be reading it, at the same time. I knew that there were people who they don't like to read ebooks, they're going to want to read the physical book. I wanted to have it. So even though I had it written and I knew it was going to, and then it was going to take, 6 or 8 weeks to get the books printed and shipped and everything like that. I waited. I didn't release a playtest version or an early PDF or anything like that. But for this, I would rather have it. I would rather have it all written and the text finalized, and then when the Kickstarter is done, everybody gets the PDF. And then I worry about getting it printed, and I'll ship the print copies later. So, if in my ideal timeline, I'd get that version written by. So it's summer break right now. My son's on summer break. I am not going to get any writing done until he's back in school near the end of August. But ideally, I'd have it written by October-ish. Get some external play testing and do a Kickstarter in like February.
Okay. So this is the because I had a couple of people who just asked about. I will just throw this out there that if you are ever looking to do an online demo of this on a Twitch channel, I might know a guy that might be interested in showcasing said thing. Maybe I might know someone who might want to play in it who is clearly Susan Jones. No, I'm just kidding. Who is clearly Dot, who I think would be incredible at this, and who I can recommend highly. So anyway, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if you get to the point where you'd like to do that in an online context, please let me know, because I have a feeling the viewers would be really big fans of taking a look at that in a demo format. So I will just throw that out there. You need not say, yes, sure, but just something to think about if it gets to the point where you feel comfortable doing that. So let's, all right, that's really interesting. And I really cool stuff that I want to see that game for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit then about, let's broaden it out, and let's talk a little bit about campaigns perhaps that we've been playing in. I think I started with 3 because of the interview, so I started with the subject of the day, which is fine. So I'll talk a little bit about our campaigns that we've been doing, and maybe that'll give us a chance to talk about the stuff that Paul plays when he's not designing awesome games like this. And then we'll talk a little bit about product review, and then I will open things up for chat to ask a few questions if they have them. So just a quick reset. This is episode 19 of Masters of the Dungeon, our DM's Roundtable show, joined as always by the awesome little Red Dot and by Paul Sega, who is our special guest for this month, who is a game designer and developer, and is really, really interesting in the way that he thinks about and talks about games in a really cool way. Maybe an all-girl gamer team to play it. 1,000% yes. I think that would be amazing and awesome, and I would be 100%. I would love to be able to host it on my channel and then not play it at all and watch other people playing it like Dot and others. So yeah, we'll talk about it off stream. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but that would be lovely if something like that were possible. So let's talk a little bit about the campaigns then, and I'll start with you, Dot, because I know you were talking about all the session zeros, etc. Do you want to throw a couple of those session zeros at us in terms of campaigns that you're starting that you're like, yeah, this is awesome, let's do this?
Sure. Well, so I've been playing through a Game of Thrones tabletop right now, which has been very interesting. But it's been a plug game between our 2 sessions of Vampire the Masquerade.
Okay.
So I had my private session tonight with Mathis, our GM for our next Vampire the Masquerade, which takes place 10 years after the first season, which is a pretty big deal. So it's the first time I think actually as a player where I sat down and was like, what has actually happened? It is important to know what has happened with my character in 10 years time. especially now there's like a Methuselah that's risen in Chicago and so forth and so on. So that was a really fun one. It was just a big character dive, and it made me realize how damn much I miss that game. That being said, I launch a game on Tuesday. I'm starting a Scum and Villainy campaign. So we just had our session 0 with the crew, of our ship. We did the usual things. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm not using all of their content from it. The game's called the Purloin Code. So there's kind of a guild. It's called the Purloin Guild that is in place, and you either are part of it or you are not. And if you are found doing work outside of the Purloin Guild, which sanctions mercenary work throughout this galaxy in particular, you could be in big trouble. Like, die. So no big deal. So that's been really fun. I'm really excited for that one. I haven't run sci-fi on my channel yet.
Really?
I've run any sci-fi. Yeah, I've not run any sci-fi on the channel. I mean, I've run everything from Anchorman campaigns to Brave Little Toaster campaigns.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, you got
I run
everything
all
else.
the random stuff, but I've not run a science fiction campaign. So this is my partial love letter to like all of the to Firefly and Rogue One and the things that I love, but it also has a lot of Philip K. Dick kind of wrapped into it. This very kind of low sci-fi love that I have. So I'm pretty excited.
That's awesome. I'm excited to see some of these things begin to play out. That's really cool. Let me ask you, Paul, what do you have regular campaigns that you are consistently in? I'm guessing you do, but I don't want to assume. Are you, is there a particular campaign that you want to highlight? If so, that you've been playing in, some cool things that have been happening in that campaign, either from a game design perspective or just, this was awesome because I played and this cool thing happened type of thing.
Yeah. So like I said, we just moved from Michigan to Colorado, and so I haven't really found a local group that kicked off anything.
Okay.
But I can tell you that I played. I ran sort of a pseudo campaign.
Okay.
If you go back to the 1970s, one of the things that's true about D&D gaming culture at the time was this sort of drop-in campaign. That a game master would show up at the the student union a gaming room at in Berkeley, and whoever showed up with a character could play, and he'd end up he'd be a college kid and he'd be running D&D for high school kids.
Yep.
And it was part of what the culture was like. And then over time that changed, and people started to run closed games where it was the belief was we can't have a coherent story if we have people dropping in and dropping out, and we need the same group of characters. They need to be like Aragorn and the hobbits and Gandalf on their quest. And we need a persistent cast. And one of that was one of my design goals for the Clay That Woke, actually, that it's so easy for the game master to create life circumstances for a new Minotaur, that if you've got a friend in from out of town, let them play the game that weekend. That you can give them life circumstances. It's the snap of a finger to create a character. There's so few data elements that you need to create, so that you could, as a game master, run 19, 20 session campaign of the game with Phil can't make it, one or two players can't make it this week. Oh, we can play anyway, and we can catch them up on what happened, and then we'll return to them when they can actually play. So I really wanted that dynamic for the Clay That Woke, and I'm designing another game that I wanted that same dynamic for, that I've called the Sega House Rules, and it's sort of the game that I would I think it's an OSR game. I've been told by playtesters that it's far enough diverged from that I shouldn't use that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
So I've started to call it social crawl role playing, which is a um, you know if you look at the OSR, they've taken a look at 1970s era gaming, and they've subset it in an aspect of that they really like, which is uh, life is cheap. There's a lot of gallows humor.
Mm-hmm.
Character mortality is really high. And but at the same time, there was another strain of gaming that I think social crawl role playing is an accurate description of, and that was it's more about NPC interaction, uh, uh, and encountering the world, and so I created the Sega House rules to be that kind of game, but to also solve other things that frustrated me about uh, OSR style play, and my own D&D gaming back in the 80s, and things like character death, and um, PvP and things like that. So I've been play testing that, and it has that same goal of the drop in, drop out, where you can run it for whoever happens to show up.
Mm-hmm.
I went to 2 conventions in April and May, and ran multiple sessions at each one, and yet I ran it with a different module for each one of those sessions. So it was like I was running a campaign of different scenarios across different, groups of players. I had one player play in 2 games, one boom boom, and kept the same character. But mostly it was, fresh and new characters for each one. So it was sort of a pseudo campaign of that particular game.
Yeah, that's cool though. I mean, it is, and you're right. It is very old school. I'm not going to retell the story now, but getting a chance to play in the game store where Gary Gygax played, and like this guy who had been playing with Gary and the whole crew in Lake Geneva since 1970, whatever. And it was very much that kind of thing where it was just a pickup group, and it was me, this guy who's at that point in his late 30s, with these 2 like one high school kid, and one like college kid, and it was like, all right, you go here, and there's there's kobolds in a cave, and I had this sort of moment of remembering what it was like playing Keep on the Borderlands or whatever at the very beginning of all of it, not having known anything about anything, and having that same kind of experience. And it was a pickup experience, like you say. You just go in, and the GM's there, and you just play. And there is a kind of purity to that, even though it means you do lose out on the possibility of story. But that's neat. So cool. I will just very quickly highlight, I've got campaign stuff going all the time, but I will mention that I've had a chance to really kind of stretch in and out of the sort of book stuff with Esper Genesis, which is my space opera game that folks know on here that I've been playing for a while, which is sponsored by Alligator Alley Entertainment. So Esper Genesis has been going really, really, really great, but I keep being nervous because since we are the so-called pioneers, the flagship campaign for Twitch, it means that, thank you so much, Seth, for the sub, dude. I appreciate it. Thank you for the gift to Crimnus. What's up, Crim? But the result is that I feel like a lot of times I'm like, because their threats database, basically their monster manual, is going to be coming out within the next month. And I keep being like, so did I make that creature not at all what you intended the creature to be? Because I read the basic contours of it, and I was like, so it's a Fenarg that does this. I'm like, but what if it also was enslaved, and partially this is its reaction to it? And they're always super generous about it. They're like, nope. They're like, this is your game world. It's your version of it. But I'm always a little nervous that I feel responsible, for not just fouling up their game before the monster manual appears, and people are just going to be like, the hell is this? That's not the way that he did it, And so it's been fun to sort of get a a chance to talk with them. And I bring it up because at Origins last month in Columbus, I was playing with a couple of them live, Cat Rambo, Carlos Hernandez, who are really wonderful players. And the other two were actually, one of them couldn't make it. The other one was remoted in from California. And getting a chance to play with the Alligator Alley guys who were all there. So all of them are in the room live watching us do this live stream. And there's a point where I'm just like, and I've been, streaming in front of many people for a long time now. But still, I was a little bit like, I hope I don't get any mechanical question wrong or whatever else. And the next day, they ended up leaving before the session was over. And the next day, I came by their booth, and I'm like, in the exhibit hall, I'm like, hey, thank you for stopping by. I hope everything was okay. And they're like, okay. They're like, that was tremendous. You did a great job. I'm like, really? Because I was really worried that you were uncomfortable with what they're like. No, it was great. It's awesome. Super amazing. Blah, 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 blah. We love it. So that was a huge relief because it really felt like dad is watching, you know what I mean? Like, that's not how you do that. It's sometimes when you're doing online gameplay, especially, you don't necessarily have to worry that someone is staring you down as the actual person who did this. But they, that was the way it felt doing this in front of the live audience. But exactly, yeah. Oh, the drone. That's right. I actually had a situation where I had to ask one of them, what are the stats on this drone? They're like, oh, this, and this. I'm like, all right, well, there you go. The person who actually created it was the stats. But anyway, it was funny. And it was enjoyable to get a chance to kind of meet up with those people who were the designers. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit just briefly then about a product review. If we have a game that we have picked up that we really liked and thought was neat, I want to talk about this game, so I will start. The Warren by Marshall Miller. So I want to say that I picked this up, actually, this is Bully Pulpit Games, and I picked this up because I was in the process of talking to several of the developers over there, including Jason Morningstar and Karen Twelves, and then Alex Roberts I mentioned with For the Queen. And so you look over there, and it's really dangerous because you just start looking at them, and then you open the book, and that's a big, don't ever, this is just a general sort of point. Don't open books ever, because the minute you open them, it's very likely if the cover interested you and at the first few pages, you will end up leaving and buying the book. And probably you can't, you just can't do that. So I open it up, and the second page is quoting, all the world will be your enemy, prince of 1,000 enemies, and when they catch you, they will kill you. But first they must catch you. Digger, listener, runner, prince with a swift warning, be cunning and full of tricks, and your people will never be destroyed. And that, of course, is from the supreme great work of genius, I think, Richard Adams' Watership Down, at which point I'm like, right, close the book, bring it to the register. Now I will buy the book because you quoted Watership Down, and obviously this is going to be tremendous. And the entire book is a tabletop role-playing game about intelligent rabbits that are trying to make the best of a world that are filled with hazards and predators, and I love this line, and worst of all, other rabbits. So you have all of these moves, like special moves, relax when you play, groom, or rest in relative safety, subtract 1 from your panic. Struggle, when you struggle to free yourself, roll plus strong. You may then take panic to increase your roll. On a 10 plus, you manage to wriggle free. On a 7 to 9, you can wriggle free if you are willing to take a scar. On a 6, you can't escape and you take a scar anyway. You can mate, you can birth a litter, you can retire, you can, time goes by. I mean, this is just, everything about this just screams like love to me, right? And I love the concept of games like this that are telling and making it possible for us to tell more story and narrative through game design in various venues. And for a lot of people who adore, and I know many of them, Watership Down, and games and books like it, this is a game that will speak to them. So I'm all about it. Like, yeah, exactly, Rockon. Is that a Watership Down game, right? Like, that's all you really need to say. Yes. And so, therefore, obviously, you're going to buy it. So I really, really have been just really intrigued by it, even in terms of character creation and things like that. Really neat stuff. And it does it without simply anthropomorphizing it and making it all humans as rabbits. It really does try to, in part, think about what would be of interest to rabbits, not just humans that are pretending to be rabbits. And so I think that's really neat. And I can't wait to play it, and if we reach the $5,000 on the Kickstarter, we're going to play it tonight after Masters of the Dungeon is over. So that will happen if we reach $5,000 on the Kickstarter. So if you want to see this game that I've just sold, jump over that Kickstarter and please support if you can. And thank you. So that's me.
It's interesting. That reminds me of a game a friend's writing. I can't give away too much about it, but I really love it. You play as bees.
Okay.
as worker bees in a hive,
Okay.
and you're playing bees. But the game has a mechanism of time because bees only live for a very short period of time.
Right.
Worker bees do. So you actually play with a calendar month. Like a calendar comes in, and every day is like part of the scene that you play. And each day is like a little different, but you roll for everything there, and you play this group of bees. It is so effing cute. I'm hoping to play it this next round on one of my Sunday fun days when they get it done.
Okay.
They're hoping to get it done by Gen Con. But that reminds me a little bit of it. It's like it's not humans trying to be bees. You're trying to live the life of bees and the personality of bees as they are. And the like calendar month mechanism is really, really cool, and like trying to get things done in the time that you have when your life is so short
Yeah.
but important. It's really neat.
No, that's really cool. I am interested now.
Maybe
That
when
sounds so
that one's
cute, too.
done, I'll share that one on another month when it's completed, and I can actually truly
Cool.
sell it in its capacity.
Dig it. I will do that. What about so do you have anything that you want to share, Dot, and then I'll have Paul finish up with that this part of things.
Well-
a game as of late that you have purchased, or that doesn't have to be just a game. It can be a product of some kind.
Yeah.
Manual.
Oh my god, so many things. Well,
Awesome
I've been
dice.
playing a lot of Scum and Villainy, but actually, I was inspired to run the Scum and Villainy campaign after reading Coriolis.
Mhm.
Have you looked at that sci-fi game? Freaking beautiful.
I've only heard of it. I haven't read it though.
Oh my god! It was one of those like I opened the pages and was like, it's just like jaw drop. So
Mhm.
I bought it. It's beautiful. So it's my new like dense love. It's a beautiful sci-fi book. It's basically Arabian Nights meets hard sci-fi.
Okay. I'm already
So
in.
it's just got this like beautiful feel to it. It's just a really cool game. So I'm getting ready to play some of it this weekend, which is cool. But my newest one, actually, Maggie, you guys all know Margaret, that comes over here on the channel every once in a while. I'm in a new game that she has created, that I really love. And it's basically teen witches. Like we're a bunch of witch girls at like a high school. But what's really cool about the game is it's created kind of like a Mad Lib. So everybody helps create the other person's character sheet. So for example, I fill in a series of like adjectives about my physicality and the things that I like and I don't like. But then based on the other girls that I go to school with or that are in my little like coven, I have to have one that's my best friend because. And then like we all create the school together, and you may give a name for a teacher, but then I have to give a quality for that teacher. And then the next person has to give a flaw for that teacher. And so everything is built together before you ever play. It's this really neat little game, and everything is based on like a 2d8 system, very simple. And there's no book for like, here are your magic spells. Like a witch can make a spell anytime she wants to. And to learn that spell or to level it up, you have to fail 5 times or either succeed at it 3 times.
Okay.
So it's not like you're never going to learn it. We learn when we make mistakes. So the game is also set up to be like, well, you failed 5 times. You know how to freaking cast it. You may not be good at it, but you can at least cast it. You've leveled up. So it's been a really neat, like totally different kind of system that's very, very open. And like I said, has just from like literal baseline building has very collaborative like nature to it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so the name of it is.
The name of it is Witches and let me go grab it off Maggie's channel. I'm not going to remember. I think she just released it. Or she's getting ready to. You should be able to actually purchase the game
Okay.
very soon. I believe it's just called Witches and the reason I don't know its name is because you name your game after the academy that you choose. So we're called Jasper Jinx Academy, but the game is called Witches and Spellcraft. It's very simple, Witches and Spellcraft. And I love it. It's really, really neat. She's even got a Roll20 build for it.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool,
Witches and Spellcraft. That's cool.
Yeah. You have to ask her about it.
Yeah, I will do that. I'm gonna have to look that up. Very cool. Paul, what about you? Do you have a particular game that you've had your eye on, perhaps not necessarily yours, that you've been like, this is awesome as of late? Or not just a game, could be anything, but game is what I was thinking.
Yeah. Like my current thing is I've really been paying a lot of attention to designers who are publishing small games on itch.io.
Okay.
I think that they're doing games in a different way. There's a very sort of wholehearted, undertone to publishing 2-page games, 3-page games, selling them for pay what you want or $2, participating in game jams, and I think it's a really there's a lot of emotional honesty in the games.
Okay.
They tend to be solo play or 2-player games, or in a lot of cases they're not done. They're drafts or they're so I mean, if I was going to say there's one thing that I'm excited about, it's seeing people tweet that they've posted something, and and having a chance to download it. And I'm always looking. My son's 7.5 years old, and I'm always looking for things to play with him.
Mm-hmm.
We play a lot of board games, but every now and then someone will post one of these small little 2-player role-playing games that I think he would have fun doing. And so then I'll print out this 2-page thing and we'll do it. And, we played one that was about the passing of the seasons and its effect on a family. And I can't remember the name of the designer for that one. I could find that and send it to you, and you can put it in your show notes.
Yeah.
If you want. And I just downloaded one today that was from a fellow Twitch streamer. Her name is Summer,
Mm-hmm.
and she posted one that's about playing The Floor is Lava. And you set up the floor and you roll the dice, and they're almost like Apocalypse World style moves.
Okay.
Where if you try and jump to another piece of furniture or you try to push somebody off, you roll the dice, and on a hit you get something. You get to choose something. On a miss, something, you take some harm. And so I mean, that one's just fun, I think. But I mean, some of them are very deeply honest. There's a woman who's on Twitter as Temporal Hiccup, and she posts things that are very much they're sort of like affirmations. They're games as affirmations. You are a you're a mermaid, and it's a really fun scene. I occasionally find stuff I can play with my son, but I do have a game that I wanted to tell Chelsea about, because I think it's something that you will like.
Oh, I'm all ears.
So it's called Daughters of Verona. Have you heard of it?
I have not. Where's my sticky notes? I keep sticky notes of all the games I'm supposed to buy, and then every time I buy one, I'm allowed to remove the sticky notes. It's the only way
Daughters of Verona is I think it has the best understanding of how humor works of any game that I've ever played. It's a Shakespearean game.
Oh my! I'm in the middle of writing a Shakespeare game. This is awesome.
You need to read this. And the thing that it does so well is it gives you a list of truths, and so it tells you what the truths are. And I pulled up in the PDF. I'll read some to you. This story is a comedy. Comedies end with a feast and marriages for the lovers. Do not describe in third person what you can say in first. Audience at the back might not see your props, but they will hear your voice. And there's several of these bullet points. It says, all the roles are played by men. Heroines disguised as men are therefore men dressed as women dressed as men. This is hilarious. If identities can be mistaken, they are. Mistaken identities are hilarious. Infidelity is hilarious, even if it is only implied. So it tells you what's funny. And so by installing it in you like that, then when you play the game, it is funny because you're all on the same page. Yeah. So you've got all these cards that are different characters, and then you have a series of scenes.
It's kind of cool. Sorry, I'm looking at the sample print on Drive-Thru. This is cool.
My face hurt from laughing so much after playing it. So I think it's your kind of thing.
Oh, for sure. That just got added to the wish list. That's like I don't have enough games to play right now. Oh, cool. Very cool. The other one that I've been looking, the other one that I've kind of been eyeballing, that I've only had a chance to quickly read through is Don't Rest Your Head, which is like a horror based game by Evil Hat, which has been which is really neat. It's like a psychological horror and the whole. Did I tell you about this one, Arm? I don't know what I talk about when we do these on a once a month basis anymore.
I don't think so.
So the purpose is basically you're trying to fight sleep, because if you sleep, basically bad things happen while you sleep in this like world. So
Okay.
the whole goal is like what happens to you as you fight extreme amounts of basically insomnia. It's really cool. It's called Don't Rest Your Head, and then it's got a series of other ones that like come along with it, like they call it the Don't bundle. There's 3 games, like Don't Rest Your Head, Don't something, and Don't something else. I can't remember. What is it? Don't lose your mind. Don't lose your mind. Don't rest your head. Are the 2 that they put out, and then they have a new one that called Don't Read This Book,
Okay.
which is really fun. Which is kind of like a it's like the Ring. Once you read the book,
Mm-hmm.
you know you've done it now. You've opened up Pandora's box or whatever. So those have been really cool too, especially if you really like horror RPGs, or you like to bring a high level of suspense to the table. It's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Those popped up in my wish list, and I was like, oh, I forgot I was looking at those.
Very cool. So those are good ones to sort of add. So see, there's there's really a lot of good stuff that's out there by a lot of really great designers and developers who, and I think this is something which, speaking of Shakespeare, that was my expertise as an academic is Shakespeare, and that's one of the things that was notable about Renaissance drama is that all of these playwrights were in conversation with each other, right? They were all sort of playing off of each other and essentially in conversation through their various dramatic works with each other.
So meta.
And it feels to me like games are really doing the same thing. I mean, a lot of these independent games, it seems to me, are in discussion in some ways and debate with each other, and sometimes not debate, sometimes playing off or building upon or, complicating or simplifying as they see at different aspects of each other. And that's all for the good, because the sort of sign of a vibrant industry is one in which there are a variety of avenues that people can access, come into, leave again. Even the number of games that are sort of based on powered by the apocalypse world, or Scum and Villainy, which is itself a hack of Blades in the Dark, or many of these things. All of that I think contributes to the sense of a really powerful conversation, that continues to go along with everything. So
but I think you know how much I love Evil Hat, obviously, but their Fate Accelerated, I'm learning more and more. I'm really like companies that put out like an open source or open content piece that people can build off of. So like I'm playing a lot of The Breakfast Cult right now, which is a Fate Accelerated game that somebody else completely built off of Evil Hat's product. And I think there's something really cool about that. Like even Evil Hat reached out, because I reached out, I was like, hey, by the way, we're doing this game. They're like, we didn't even write that game. They wrote that game. They're just using our mechanism. And there is again, it's like a double layer. It's like Inception collaboration. It's like collaboration at the physical gaming table, and then there's this level of collaboration between like writers that are happening in the indie game scene, and this writer play, as you talk about, like the way I love it. It makes my heart all warm and fuzzy.
Yep, it's all collaboration all the way down. Well, actually, that leads me to one question, which will be my last for Paul's, and then we will open it up to chat. We have about 20 minutes left so we'll give chat a chance to ask a couple of questions. But I do want to have one sort of follow-up, which is when you were at the Forge, Paul, I assume that you had a chance to do some of this anyway, but I'm curious about your take on collaboration, because some of these things may be necessary to be produced by sort of by one person, by which I mean, you have a unified vision, and it's hard when you have several people with differing, different visions to sort of come to one sort of to come to one conclusion about the way that a game ought to be played out. But I'm curious about how you would feel about that as well. Are you still of a mind that you would want to do collaborative game development, or are you more kind of on your own where you really want to be able to produce the vision that you've got for a given game? Or if the answer is, I guess it depends, then that's fine too, but I'm curious about that.
Boy, that's a good question. um, you know, I've dabbled with collaboration as a, you know, as a thing. Uh, Way back in the 2000s, Jared Sorensen, the designer of Inspectors and Lacuna, um, and the Parsley games, if you know what those are, um,
Yeah.
he he issued a game design challenge called the Indie Game Company Game Design Challenge or something like that. And the idea was you had to form a company. Um, you had to have a writer, an artist, producer. I don't remember, maybe a mechanical designer. And the four of you had to collaborate and produce a game and put it up for sale for $1. And at the end of the 1 month period of time, whoever sold the most copies of their game for $1 was the winner of the challenge.
Okay.
And you know, I wasn't going to do it. I toyed with the idea of doing, but it's like, I've got a bazillion projects. I've got other stuff I'm thinking about. But a friend of mine came to me and says, I want to do it. You know, I want to do this thing. I'm going to assemble a team. Will you be the mechanical designer for it? And I said, all right, fine. You know, I'll do it. You know, he wanted to be the producer. He wanted to be the, and what was interesting, there are a couple of interesting things. One of the interesting things was that there's a lot of people out there with ideas for games who don't execute on them. And that brought a lot of people to the, you know, to the forefront. You know, I mean, it felt like permission to them to say, hey, we could do this game design challenge and somebody could help me design my idea, you know, and somebody could help me get it written and somebody could help me, you know. So I sat down and I tried to understand his idea, which was about Roman era Britain and the, you know, the conflict between the Romans and the Britons and the and I, you know, I came up with a game system for it, and nobody else came through. You know, the artist, you know, didn't come through. He didn't, you know, my friend, he didn't really like the mechanics I came up with, but he just was just going to deal with it. You know, he sent him off to the writer. The writer didn't do anything. You know, and so I think that, you know, like you say, you know, collaboration is fraught with human weakness, you know, as a result of incomplete overlap between shared vision and energy, and you know, things sort of fall apart. The way that challenge played out was Jared came, you know, in the next month, he said, all right, here's what happens. The challenge goes another month. If you want to design a game as an indie designer all yourself, you can do it and you can publish it and you can try to win the challenge, but you only have a month to sell it and everybody else had 2 months, right? So I took those mechanics, I wrote the game, I put it up for sale. I had like 9 days or something like that, you know, to get sales, you know, off of it. I came in second place. So, you know, but a lot of my energy in that was just irritated.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Like, you jerks, I did my part, you know,
Yeah.
didn't do your part. So
like any group project in school ever.
Yeah,
ever.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, my thinking is I don't run out of projects that I'm excited about. I've got, you know, I mean, you asked me about Traverser, but I've got the Sega House Rules. I have another game called Azathoth that I want to publish. That's play tested and written, and you know, I just need to do the layout and the graphic design. So it's not that I don't like collaborating. I ran the Three Forged challenge, which was all about collaboration. It was about, you know, 3 stages of a game. Somebody writes an initial draft, it gets handed off anonymously to somebody else, it gets handed off anonymously to a third person who finishes it, and then people voted on it. And that, you know, so collaboration is like a thing that's in my head, but I don't know, I guess I just don't run out of ideas for stuff that I want to do. So
And so, in a way, it's
It doesn't ever happen.
I was going to say it doesn't. Right. You're able to sort of focus on what you want to do, which is helpful in that regard. All right. So we have about 15 minutes here, so this is a good time to reset and ask chat to come up with some questions for us. I will just before I do that reset and say that we are honored to be joined by Paul Sega, who is of course a game designer and developer. I have a couple of the games listed up there in that center window: The Clay That Woke, My Life with Master. He's working on Traverser. He's working on a bunch of these others, the Sega House Rules, etc. And you should follow him, and I'll ask him for links and so forth at the end as well. And of course, as always, I am joined by my amazing co-host, Little Red Dot, who is with us as well. So now you know the way that this works, chat, as far as the questions are concerned. But as you're doing this, I do want to ask, since we are in the midst as well of this streamathon, that if you have not already done so, we are running a streamathon right as we speak to try to benefit the Icarus Jelinek graphic novel Kickstarter, which we're running. I am enormously, this is a collaborative project that has actually worked really well. I'm enormously happy with the story, but I'm also very proud of the art that Acela Fabio did. Athos Arts is the publisher. Satobo, who's in chat, Chris Suda is doing lettering and layout. It's a really, really great team, but we need help, because we have 14 days left to go in the Kickstarter, and there's a lot of room and movement that is left to go. And so I would encourage everyone, if you haven't done so already, please go over and check it out. As a reminder, when we hit the $3,700 mark, I will do a game giveaway. At the $4,000 mark, I'm going to commission Kilobyte to do an Arv raisin emote. If you know how much I despise raisins, that fact that I'm even agreeing to that shows you how much I really want this project to succeed. At $4,500, Shadowed Mage is going to do a custom overlay for Twitch streamers in here, and if you are not a Twitch streamer, he will do a custom magic item for you in a system, I believe D&D or of your choice, if I'm not mistaken. And at $5,000, we will get this game and we will play it now, impromptu, with viewers. Not now, I mean, once Paul and Dot are off doing their thing. I don't want to make them play this game immediately, but viewers will play it with me if we hit that. But I really do need everyone's help, so please jump on board and pledge and support and spread the word if you can for that. That would be lovely. Now, you folks know the way to do the questions. Kilobyte has just shown you how to do it. Please type question in all caps, then whatever your question is, and we will address it as a panel / Paul will address it if you have it for us individually. So Kilobyte starts with the question, what is everyone's favorite horror RPG? I will start by backing off and saying that I don't like horror because it freaks me out and scares me and does its job. So I don't like being scared, and so I don't like horror. It is not at all a comment on the quality. I have many good friends who are wonderful horror writers, and there's a lot of great horror games. It's just not my bag. Although Curse of Strahd, which I am playing, is, a lot of people would argue, is that. It's just that I don't like horror, but I do like spooky. So the kind of gothic, sort of Frankensteinian, Sherlock Holmes, wandering the moors, the Hound of the Baskerville stuff, that stuff I do dig. And I feel like Curse of Strahd has been for that for me. So I guess Curse of Strahd would be the closest I would come, but otherwise not my bag, but that's just me. I know, however, that is not a problem for Dot in terms of liking horror. So.
This is a person with a skull. This is actually one of my wig stands. It's Sans wig right now, but yeah, I love horror games. I love them so stupidly much. So if you want like really spooky, scary, well, I have to say the best collaborative horror game I think is Bluebeard's Brides. Period.
Okay.
I think it's so interesting to have to break apart somebody's psyche that way, and it has definitely come with its own fair share of trigger warnings. But it is so interesting to see, like, the way that people collaborate in that realm, and just how terrifying it can be. If you want a funny one, obviously Die Laughing, I think, is the best funny horror game that's out there. But the best, hands down, the in person with people will make your butt pucker game is one called 10 Candles. I adore it.
I've seen that on Hyper RPG a little bit. Yeah,
it is one of the most interesting RPG games. It's just like, so basically you light 10 candles in a circle around the room, and as activity takes place throughout the game, it's like tragedy horror, and every time something goes away or dies or tragedy happens, you have to blow a candle out, and the game ends when all the candles are blown out. But sometimes you'll blow out one candle and you may blow out 2 or 3, which means you've just literally skipped 3 steps ahead in the game. You don't get to go back and relight those candles. So there's this intensity to it. Sitting in a room with people, you're like, whoa, but We just lost 3 candles. That means we've lost a third of the book. There's a whole chunk of the book we don't even get to. Like, what did we miss? Who did we kill accidentally? There's this intensity around the table that I think you rarely really get in a horror game. You can fake it till you make it, and you can try to set that up, but there's something about having to lean over and blow out that damn candle. And the idea is you turn all the lights out. It's just you and these 10 candles. So by the time you get to the last candle and you blow it out, you're all in pitch black dark. It's so much fun. It's like a sleepover game meets an RPG game.
And
It makes me
with
so happy.
murder. With
murder, with lots of murder. Yeah.
all those things plus murder.
This is why I didn't have any girlfriends in elementary school. Nobody wanted to come hang out with me at house.
Any kind of live streams of this, there's a lot of sepia tones. All right, I'm just saying, there's a lot of also blacks and whites. A lot of that stuff. People have sleepovers without murder. I mean, occasionally, Kill. It's on occasion it's happened that's the case. Yes. Yes. 10
Well,
candles.
and I missed it. I mentioned Don't Rest Your Head too, but I think 10 Candles really just takes the match.
All right. 10 Candles is Little Red Dot's highest recommendation for a horror game. Paul, you have one that stands out for you if you even like horror games?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I agree with you. I am not a fan of horror, but when I say that, I always have to qualify it because My Life with Master is a horror game, and I think, but I think that when I design a horror game, it's because horror is the right genre for something that was artistically important to me. That was so, and I think artists do that. They use a genre for their own purposes. In the way that Tarantino used, Pulp Fiction as a genre for something that he wanted to do differently. The genre becomes a platform, becomes a platform to make an artistic statement. And so the horror genre was my platform for that. With that said, my favorite horror game does exactly the same thing. It uses genre as a platform for its own thematic payload. And that game is a solo journaling game called The Beast, and it's by Alexandra Santowska. And you play it for 21 days. You turn over a card each day, and it's a journaling prompt. And it's about you, and you are having a secret sexual relationship with a beast. And the cards are how this has this cascade effect in your life, what your relationship with the beast is like, how your relationship with your coworkers and your family changes over the course of it. You write in a journal, half a dozen or a dozen sentences or something, a quick journal entry in response to each card. You play it for 21 days, and it will deconstruct you, and if you're lucky, it will put you back together at the end. It's really great.
Interesting. That's cool.
Wow.
I played a one-person game the other day. I found called A Cozy Little Game, and just kind of like that. You write letters to yourself, and then in a week you go back and reopen the letter. It's kind of interesting.
That's cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it is. It was that one. It feels a little bit more like almost like a character prompt because it asks you questions like you roll a d6 and your next prompt's about love. So answer the question with love in mind. But yeah, that's cool. I'm the worst when it comes to prompts like that.
I think Alex says that The Beast was a inspiration when she started working on For the Queen.
Interesting.
Huh. That's
I'll have to
cool.
check that out. That's really cool.
Yeah,
I've been looking for more because let me tell you, if there's one thing that I am so tired of, having to cast and gather people to play games on my channel. It's tiresome. It's just tiring.
What do you
right?
mean? It's so easy to do.
So tiring. So it's really nice sometimes to be like, oh, it's a Thursday night. I've got a couple hours. I'd like to play just a one-person role-playing game. What?
Yeah.
Or to do a prompt type thing. So yeah, that's I'm gonna have to check that one out. I've been collecting more of those.
I do sort of the equivalent of that with a lot of my Fighting Fantasy Gamebook version playthroughs. With a little program that I have to do that, and so where chat basically plays the collective, person, the individual who's kind of going through the book, but not still, even then, not quite the same thing. So, okay, so there you go. There are your three answers to that, Kilobyte. Other questions that we have in about 5-6 minutes. We have time for one or two more. Anyone in terms of questions that you have for either all of us or one of us? Question, Second OBS asks, you mentioned at one point the clay that woke favors the I don't think he actually said quite this. Favors the possibility of drop-ins over a modern trend of closed groups. How does it accomplish that? I don't think that's exactly what you said, although I might be wrong, Paul. I don't think that's exactly what you meant, but sort of drop-ins over a modern, because he was talking about that in relation to something else, not the clay that woke, I believe. But I mean, I guess that is a good question, though, about favoring the possibility of drop-ins over a modern trend of closed groups. Do you have you thought a little bit about that? Getting a game that could actually do some of that?
Yeah. So the clay that woke is I mean, it's a campaign play game, and I've said that I called it an old school game at first because in my mind it has elements of old school play in it. It's a fantasy game, and the characters have advancement, but the advancement doesn't look like it does in an OSR game or in a traditional fantasy game. It's not like you're leveling up, but you change in ways. Your effectiveness becomes different. You're using tokens, and so I wouldn't say that it favors drop-in play over a traditional sort of closed group play, because I think in order to see a full campaign arc play out, you're going to want to have a character or two who is pretty consistently appears throughout the entire campaign, so that you can see how they change, how they're, you can gain gifts, and the gifts are, associated with your identity in a way that like Stormbringer is associated with Elric's identity.
Sure.
Your tokens will change. You'll have a bigger supply of certain tokens than you would of others. And those tokens allow you to be effective in different ways than when you're a character that's starting out. But I will say that I wanted to support drop-in play. I wanted a group to be able to play if someone was absent for a session, and I wanted a group to be able to play if one or two people happened to be in town, and the game master wanted them to be able to participate. And the way that works is you can make a character very quickly, and there's only a few stats that you have to make when you create your character, and then the game master will give you your starting supply of tokens, and you're ready to go. And you'll have a group of other players who will be able to help you strategize the mechanics, and you'll have fun. You're a drop-in player, and it works. And the way, if somebody can't be there for a session, is the rules tell you to sort of be fluid with your understanding of time. So if I was going to run it and one of the players couldn't be there, or two of them couldn't be there, I could run it for one player or for two players. Maybe their portion of the game would play out as, a 2-day weekend or something that they, where they're performing a task for their employer, or it could be this sort of really tight time frame that is just a sort of blink of the eye in the other character's narrative, and it just so happens that the other character isn't around for that, and you can bring them back in the next week. You can fill them in on what happened, and keep going.
Very cool. Okay, and I think the last question, which will come to us from Eridanel to wrap up, is what is your all-time favorite single-player DM-free RPG? So I assume we're talking about single-player DM-free tabletop role-playing game, because computer role-playing game would be a whole other different ball of wax. Single-player DM-free RPG. Well,
That means that's one person. That's not player and game master. That means you're
right.
playing it by yourself.
Right, it's not one on one, right, Erdanel? It's like kind of a selfish question. I'm looking for some to try. Okay, so it's just an individual play. Okay, I will allow them to answer. I will cheat slightly by saying that for my money, growing up, there were two that fit that description. One of them was Flying Buffaloes, Tunnels, and Trolls, which had a lot of essentially solo modules that you could play, which were like Choose Your Own Adventure, but had different sort of variations on the theme. The other one, though, which is the cheating part, is the Steve Jackson Sorcery series, which is the greatest game book series ever made. I don't think it's even that close. A 4-book series that is an extraordinary achievement. Now, you've seen me play some of Inkle's version of that, the computerized version, which is amazing too, and which broadens out the collection. But just from the 4 books by themselves, it is an extraordinary experience, and it's a lot more than just choose your own adventure, turn here, turn there, even more than Fighting Fantasy. So if I were making a thought about that, that's what I would say if I were to cheat slightly. But I will let my co-roundtablists, panelists, weigh in on what they think.
Me?
I'll start. Sure, Paul. Let's start with you.
So, I'll say The Beast, which I recommended as a horror game. It's a solo journaling game. It's a fantastic game. I really like it. I will also say that the scene of people publishing small games on itch.io is full of sort of solo player games that are often very sort of ritualistic, tell yourself these things, imagine that you have this relationship with this other person, and you sort of play them out, in your own head. Temporal Hiccup had one that was really good about being a mermaid. And I will also say that because you mentioned the choose your own adventure style games, my son is super into into these. He's 7.5 years old, and ones that we found that are just awesome are called Hocus and Pocus, and there's 2 of them. And they were translated from French, I think. So they're a few years old in France and pretty much new in the United States in English. And they break so many of the conventions of the fighting fantasy games and the that sort of the fighting fantasy game books where you've got a character sheet and you occasionally roll the dice when you get to a combat and you track it. Instead of having a character sheet, they've got a quest tracker. You can't die before the end, and because they're graphic novels, they've got puzzles and things that are and clues that are hidden within the artwork.
Oh, I've seen this. Yeah, I just got this at Origins. Crusoe's Crew is a game version of this where you can actually play either 1 or 4 collaboratively choose your own adventure, and it's the same artist. I'm positive of it. It's the same kind of design. My daughter is.
It is the same artist.
My daughter loves it. Yeah. I'd forgotten all about that. Yes,
those are the descendant game of the Hocus and Pocus.
That's super
ones. Cool. So that's a 4-player version, and those game books they use the same art at times, except one character book might have some clues in that art panel that the other one doesn't. So you end up collaborating from book to book as you're playing as a group, because I can give you information that you need in order to go down a path in your book that you don't have access to. And you can do the same. You can help me solve puzzles in mine that I wouldn't be able to solve without your input as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are. I have not played those. I want to get those, but The Hocus and Pocus books are pretty great.
Oh, that's neat. I didn't. I'm gonna have to look those up. Yeah, because my daughter is 11, is just a huge fan of the Crusoe's Crew thing, and it was one of those things. I was walking past the booth and I was like, "What?" And I looked at this, I was like, "What is this?" And they're like, "Well, it's collaborative, choose your own adventure graphic novel." I'm like, "Sold. Where do I buy? Tell me where I buy it."
Take my money.
Take my money right now. Dot, what do you got? If any?
God, it's so hard. There's one I've played it a long time ago, and this was actually long before I was streaming on Twitch. I think it's called The Smoke Dream. Is what the game is called. It's called The Smoke Dream, and you play it with a regular deck of cards. There's like a book and a deck of cards, and it's kind of like solitaire. And the premise is that you're kind of having this weird dream, and you're looking for the missing heart. And you're doing by like flipping cards, so it's like partially almost tarot-y meets like the game guide,
Okay.
but it's a one-person game. It's pretty neat. That's the one I don't know why just like popped into my head. And like I said, I really liked I like the RPG I found the other day. The cozy little game? That what it's called? The cozy little game, which is kind of neat. You use like one 6-sided die. And that one's all about like writing stories. So basically the only prompt you're given is that you've been away from home for some time. And then you like roll to see why you left. And then you're supposed to write like a few sentences describing the day that you left home. And then, you roll again and it gives you another prompt and you write a few more sentences. And then at the end you like write a letter and package it and you prepare to return home. So you're like journaling your journey from leaving to going back, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. And then it's like before you return home, you write a letter on stationery and then you like package it. And then a week later, you like open it and read it from the perspective of somebody else that it's actually addressed to. It's really neat. So that's a fun game too. But the one that really popped in my mind was one called The Smoke Dream.
Okay, the Smoke Dream, that's cool. Yeah, Rogan, unfortunately, I mean, I'll throw this out there, but we'd have to answer it super quick because I promised these folks it would be 2 hours, so I need to let them go. But the quick question is: the stories coming from Celtic folklore, especially about fairy, are to me the best around to explain the parallel between humanity and the divine, usually in a horrific way. Are you familiar with the fairy lore, and was it an influence at any point? So I don't want to get into a big long thing because that's a great question, but I'll just throw that out quickly. Paul, was fairy lore an influence on any of the games that you have done, would you say?
I would say, sort of. I mean, I've got a couple of games that are not, commercial anything. I designed one as an Instagram image because I wanted to see if I could cram a whole role-playing game into an Instagram image, and that one was called Cannot Ever Cry, and it's about, I mean, I called them the Saya and the Plusaya, but basically they're the Seelie and the Unseelie, and their queen is in the mortal realm. She doesn't know she's a queen. And there are and her life is not awesome. And there are consequences if she ever cries. So, so that's about the strongest reference to fairy in anything that I've designed.
That's interesting, though. Yeah, I like.
You could search "Cannot Ever Cry" as a hashtag on Instagram, and you could find it.
Okay, Cannot Ever Cry. I like it. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like the one-page dungeons where everything has to be just implemented on this one single page, which is an interesting dynamic.
People hated it. They said they couldn't read it.
Yeah, well,
the problem with being an experimental artist is
right. It's called process. Process, not product, people.
Exactly. Get a magnifying glass, for the love of God. Well, this has been really, really awesome and really fascinating conversation, as I suspected it would be. Paul, where can the fine folks, where's the best place for them to find you and all your doings and be ready for when Traverser comes out and other various games that you're working on? Where should they go to find you?
Yeah, so... at one point it would have been Google Plus. The game design scene was on Google Plus, and if you followed me, you'd have been sure to see everything. Now if you follow me, I'm at Paul Sega on Twitter.
Okay.
You're at the mercy of the algorithm as to whether you see everything that I tweet. But I'm super all over the map. I've I've got a couple of games on itch.io. One of them's a free download if you want to, if you follow me on itch.io, you'll see everything I post to it, but I don't post, every game there. If you can follow me on Mastodon as well. And I'm also at Paul Sega on Mastodon, and the algorithm's different. You might see more of my stuff. If you, I'm really hurting for and I think most game designers are. They're hurting for a home base now that Google Plus is dead.
Yep.
So, do your best. Follow me everywhere.
Follow you everywhere. And Paul, thank you very, very much again for agreeing to be on, and spending some time with us is really interesting. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Moving right along, of course, to my spectacular co-host, who you also, of course, will see on the Vocalists. And I'm not going to say anything other than to say that maybe you might see more of her in something else, maybe at some point. It's possible.
How our come back to the channel.
I'm just saying, I'm just speaking words, and how you assemble them in your mind is your deal. No, but it is always a great pleasure, of course, to have Dot with us. Dot, wonderful work as always. Where will the fine folks see you net here on the interwebs that does not involve being sucked back into my channel?
You can find me online, little_red_dot. I'm a GM and a digital storyteller. I love games and I love stories more. So that's where you'll see me doing. I play on a lot of awesome channels, just like this one. And you can catch me next tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be over on Roll For It, more Game of Thrones. If you've ever wanted to see me in a Fu Manchu, I have a new character. Mine didn't make it but like 6 games, and she had to go home. So she's voted off the island. I have this like 90-year-old maester character that's coming in. So that should be a lot of fun. So that's tomorrow. And then Tuesday is the premiere of the Scum and Villainy campaign I've been working on, the Purloin Code. So
nice.
That's coming up real fast. We'll be doing that month of July. And then honest to God, I'm thinking I'm going to have to take August off with like Gen Con and life.
Yep.
We'll see how that goes. But things are moving and grooving. Lots of games.
It's very cool. Always a pleasure. Again, thank you so much to Paul Sega for being with us. Always much thanks to my co-host Dot, who you will see again next month, of course. And I will let these fine folks go. But chat, if we can get some love for our wonderful co-panelists. And thank you both so much. And I will catch both of you down the road at some point. Thank you. And there we go. All right. Good stuff, folks. So that was a lot of fun. And I had a feeling it would be. I was glad that we were able to do this because I have been really jonesing to get Paul on. I really wanted to talk to him because, as you could see, he's a really interesting guy. And I really wanted to be able to see some more of that. And he said, he's like, look, you pronounce it like the video game system. I'm like, I can do that. I've had a Sega. I know the drill. So anyway, that's the deal with that. Now, folks, that leads us to the last about hour and a half. Sega. The last hour and a half of our streamathon. So let me set the picture for you as we get to it. So we are sitting here at 3640. This is not a Rorschach blot. Let me show you exactly what this is, Kilobyte. Let me introduce to you, my friend, the act you've known for all these years. This is the world. I have decided that it is time for me to introduce you to what I expect is going to happen. It is the world. I want to point out that this place has 3 prevailing pictures. We have got the world. We have got this clearly not artificial plant. And we've got the mirror, which is on the floor for some indeterminate reason that nobody knows why. So that is the deal. Yeah, flat Earth confirmed. So so that's the deal with that. So here's the deal, folks. We are at 3640 and 90 backers, and that means that we have had some progress today, but we need more. And to be candid, we've got to make serious progress today and tomorrow, today and Saturday night. If this is going to get to the point where we need it to go in terms of funding. And so I am literally not asking, I'm staring right at Aradnell's soul, for people to up pledges that have already pledged. They've already done more than enough. But what I would like to ask is if people have not already done so, if they would consider jumping over and supporting independent art and independent work. It is my story, the Icarus and Jelinek story, which I'm very proud of. It is a story about compassion, about community, about people coming together. I was really struck by what Paul said during the interview, during our Masters of the Dungeon, about the idea of how these things preventing loneliness in a way, that a lot of it is about loneliness. And so, okay, good, thank God, because seriously, Aaron, no. So I've already, like, the idea of sort of avoiding loneliness and bringing people together. And I really do think that that's something which the world in general needs more of. Games is one part of doing it, but also good storytelling. I'm very proud of Icarus. It's why I didn't just let it die. It's why I thought it was important to keep it going after the first Icarus Kickstarter came to an end and successfully funded and all, but after the whole art situation was a little weird with that. And we are very fortunate that we found an amazing artist in Nachala Fabio to do the next part of this work. But the only way that we're going to be able to get this moving forward is if we get more people to jump on board and to support what we're doing here. So please spread the word. Please let people know. Please consider jumping over and pledging yourself. There are multiple avenues that you can do that. There are multiple pledges, both small and large, that can get you limited edition hardcovers, copies of the original art, all the way down to just the basics of, dropping a couple of bucks to add to the backer list, because the more backers that we get, the more that we can also affect the algorithms on Kickstarter. But we have just crossed over into the 13 days to go mark. So we have basically 2 weeks left to go. And in that time, we're going to have to make some major pushes. So if the people that are in chat just tweeted or posted on Facebook, any of that stuff would be a big help. So please consider doing that. Once we hit the $4,000 mark today, at $3,700, $60 away, we will have another game giveaway. At the $4,000 mark, I will be required to eat a small snack box of raisins at some point on stream. And I will also commission Kilobyte to do an Arv raisin emote, which is deeply troubling to me, but that's the deal with that. So that's the deal with that. And then, of course, at the $4,500 level, Shadowed Mage will be able to give you an overlay if you were a Twitch streamer, a custom overlay, which he's exceptionally good at making. Or if you were a D&D player or a role player, he'll make you a custom magic item. And then at $5,000, we will do this. Now, my plan is to wrap up today by 9:30. But if it turns out that we actually hit the $5,000 goal before, then I might consider, I would definitely do this tomorrow is what I would say. Like if it goes too late, then I can't, because I'm getting picked up by in-laws. So I can't actually say that I'll just stay on for the next 12 hours. I've already been streaming for 9. So I can't say that. But what I will say, as I just realized I have to stop because Masters of the Dungeon, Masters of the Dungeon people are like, what are you doing? Well, if you're Masters of the Dungeon watcher, you should hopefully support us as well. But let me stop recording and say goodbye to the Masters of the Dungeon people. Thank you for watching. See you next month.